Good morning and happy Easter to you all. Welcome to our 10:30 communion service. Just lovely to see you all. If you've been up since 5 o'clock because the children were wanting to do an Easter egg hunt, then good afternoon and welcome to our service here today. Special welcome if you're visiting the island or if you're visiting friends or family. It's great to have you here, and thank you for making today, this service, a focal point of your day. It's great to have you with us. The church is looking beautiful, not because only that you're here, but also because of the flowers and the Easter garden and everybody who's done so much to make the church so fantastic. So to you and to everybody else, thank you so very much. One of our core values is to just be a warm and welcoming and inclusive church. And over the years, we've been growing in size because of that and other things. And so what I want to do is just invite you to turn to your neighbours if you don't know them and say hello to them and welcome them and give your name to them, and then I'll gather you back in a second. My children bought for me an adventure experience for my birthday. So it could be a parachute jump or a microlight flight or a micro helicopter. And Sven, this is what I think they had in mind. I hasten to say that wasn't me. Okay. Sorry, some of you I think were going, in impressed mode. I 30 seconds I thought to myself, I'll con them and say the second one was me. No, none of that was me. But they were having fun. But it struck me that I wonder how you would feel if you weren't entirely convinced of the truth that your parachute would open or that somebody would come and save you. You might actually feel a bit like this.
Alright, here we go!
So, exactly the same situation. This is the point. There's deep theology in this. Exactly the same situation, but two completely different reactions. The first lot of people had complete confidence in the truth and the reality that their parachutes were going to open and that they were in safe hands. The second person didn't believe at all. They were so scared and so terrified, all the way down. And I guess the difference between the journey on the way down and being elated and excited and joyful is knowing that actually the end is not a sudden thump at the bottom, and doubting that there might actually be a sudden thump at the bottom. Today is Easter. Think about it. Let's stand. Very often I think we underestimate how our life today is actually impacted by our hope of tomorrow. I don't know if you've ever seen that feel-good TV show called Secret Millionaire. The Americans have something equivalent. And one day, a multi-millionaire called Eugene Lang went to speak to a school in East Harlem in New York. Now, you need to know the backstory here. This school had never sent anyone to further education in 3 years. No one. What's worse, they had a dropout rate of more than 50%. More than half of the children never actually finished school. So you would be forgiven in thinking how this white multi-millionaire could say anything to inspire these children who have such poor prospects? Well, actually, what he said was really very simple. He said, if you stay in school, I will pay for your university college education. Bam. At that moment, with that promise, these youngsters' lives changed overnight. One student said, suddenly I had hope for something more, something to look forward to, something waiting for me at the end of this. As a result, I'm breaking all school records. 90% of the youngsters graduated that year, and 2/3 went on to further education. How they worked in school was transformed by their hope of tomorrow. Today is Easter, and you can guess where I'm going with this. Rodney Stark, professor of sociology in Washington University, wrote a book called The Rise of Christianity. He wanted to give an account of how Christianity spread through the world like wildfire. And he gave 3 historic examples of how Christians were categorically different to the people in the cultures around them. He said this: firstly, when the great epidemics swept the urban centres of the Roman world and decimated the population, the Roman emperor noted that while other people fled the cities for fear of the disease, the Christians stayed to tend to the sick of all faiths, even though when they did so, they were risking and many died. Second, when the dreadful persecutions broke out, the Christians did not respond to those persecutions with terrorism and violence, but rather they died publicly praying for forgiveness for their enemies. And third, when the all-engulfing Roman Empire ended up with fiercely militant, independent, multi-ethnic cultures, it was Christianity that spanned them, declaring that all people, irrespective of race, irrespective of status, and irrespective of gender, were of equal value to God. These things marked Christianity out as radically different. Now the question is why? Why the compassion for the sick at the cost of your own life? Why such forgiveness for those who persecuted you? And why so profoundly inclusive? Let's be clear, it's not because Christians are nicer people that will come as no shock to any of us. The key difference is that they possess a certain truth that transformed their hope. They believed something different about their future. They believed that death is not the end. They believed that God is just. And they believed that eternal life was an invitation open to all. So here is the $64,000 question. Where did they get this certain truth, this life-transforming hope? Answer: the resurrection of Jesus. They believed the resurrection of Jesus was a credible truth that led to a transformation in their hope. I want to suggest to you that they were right. That resurrection is indeed a credible truth, and it gives us a life-transforming hope. Resurrection is a credible truth. One thing we know today is that 2,000 years ago, the mindset of the people back then changed completely. We don't have to guess this. We don't have to speculate this. We know this as an historic fact. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 5:15 verse 3, "For what I received, I also passed on to you this news, that Christ died, that Christ was buried, and that Christ was rose again." On the face of it, I want to tell you this is an outrageous, incredible statement. Let's be clear. The resurrection of Jesus is a completely ridiculous thing to believe. It is now, and it was then. Some people will tell you, well, back then, 2,000 years ago, they believed almost anything. Much easier to believe in a physical resurrection back then, people will say. People will say, because we are more scientific, less gullible now. But I want to tell you that such a view completely misunderstands first century culture. Because actually a physical resurrection was laughably ridiculous back then too. It ran contrary to all the popular, deeply held philosophical and religious beliefs. The Greeks and Romans believed that the body is bad and the spirit is good, and that death, if anything, liberates our soul from the body. And therefore the idea of a physical resurrection would have been deeply prejudicial to everything that their philosophy taught them to be true. And if there's anything that we know about human communities, it is that prejudice takes an awfully long time to change when it's been ingrained. The Jews believed that resurrection only happened at the end of time, and the idea of a single person rising in the middle of history ran contrary to everything that their thousands of years of theology had told them. And if there's anything that we know to be true, religious communities are extremely resistant to change in their theology. Philosophical and religious pressure was hostile to a resurrection idea. But we know, and we know with certainty, we know within a few years all of that changed. Whole communities, whole cities, cultures had their mindset changed almost overnight. You say, Steve, how did that happen? And I'm glad you ask. Because the claim is that hundreds of people saw Jesus resurrected. Paul says, verse 5, Jesus appeared to Peter and then to the 12, and after that to more than 500 men and women at the same time. Some had one-on-one encounters, others met him in a group, some met him once, others met him repeatedly. They said, we've seen him, we've talked to him, we could have put our fingers in the wounds that he held. You say, how do we know that's true? Well, Paul says this, most of which are still alive. This is an open letter. This is a public letter written in the lifetime of the people who witnessed Jesus' resurrection. And truthful integrity is at the core of everyone involved. And Paul says, you can go and talk to them if you don't believe me. You still can. And this is how Christianity got started. We know their worldview changed. We know what they claimed. And we know that they were prepared to die for it. Paul says, verse 6, some have fallen asleep. We know that soon after many were killed for what they said they saw. And C.S. Lewis once said, you will never know how much you really believe something until its truth or falsehood becomes a matter of life and death. Like jumping out of an aeroplane, perhaps. But we know that these people really believed what they believed. They gave their life for what they said they saw. And you know, you don't do that for a hoax. You don't do that for a lie. You don't do that for a deception. We know this. Their worldview was prejudiced against resurrection, and overnight the culture's changed. Many people who prided themselves on deep honesty and integrity said they'd seen him. And many people died for what they knew they'd seen. They believed this with certainty. They possessed a credible truth. And it led to a life-transforming hope. A life-transforming hope that says to you and me, death is swallowed. Verse 54, Paul says death is swallowed up in victory. It doesn't say, my friends, death is removed. It says death is eaten alive. If I have a piece of cake in front of me, I only know of two ways of making it disappear. One is to remove it, and the other is to eat it. And you know which is my go-to option. God says resurrection doesn't bypass death. It doesn't remove it. It swallows it. If you eat something, it becomes part of you. If you eat something, it enhances you. What does this mean for us, for death? When Jesus rose, he showed people his wounds, still visible to all who saw him. Why? Well, because God is saying this. What is deadly and shameful and cruel, the crucifixion and the wounds and the torture, which are in and itself an ultimate display of inhumanity and hate and injustice, God takes on himself and makes the most profound proof of love. God takes human rejection and responds with boundless compassion. He takes a suffering death and transforms it into abundant life. God takes a life cut short and turns it into a life eternal. Resurrection swallows death and all that goes with it. It removes its sting. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 55, "Death, where is your sting?" What hurts about a bee or a scorpion sting is not the puncture wound so much as the poison that is injected with it. And the poison in death is not actually the act of dying, but it is the loss of everything that goes with it. Dying without being right with God, forfeiting what God has made us for, losing everything that has meaning, being estranged from God forever, losing our loved ones, losing the reason why we were made, losing ourselves even, is death's poison. What does that mean for us? Take those students we talked about at the beginning. Their hope for the future changed the way they tackled the whole of the rest of their school life, didn't it? The lessons were still just as hard. The homework still took just as long. But when it was all for nothing, there was no hope for the future. So, why bother? Everything has to be endured, and we have to squeeze joy out of every moment. But when they sensed their future, when they knew that they were working towards something bigger and brighter and more hopeful, it transformed them. They worked with purpose. They met each challenge with a reason, and their eye was on the prize. Their hope of tomorrow swallowed today's challenges. So this can be for us. We have been made for a reason. You have been loved by God for a purpose. And although the challenges today are real, we work for something bigger and brighter and better. But there's more than just that. Look, imagine you've lost something. Imagine you've lost something that you really love. You search for it high and low, all day, every day, for a week, for a month, as the days go past. Every day you miss it. Every day you grieve for it. Now imagine, still longing for it, you find it. Do you appreciate it more? Do you cherish it more now that you have it back? All was lost, but delight is compounded in the finding. Here's what I'm saying. The happiness of finding swallows, overwhelms the heartbreak of loss. Our hope for today swallows the challenges that we meet. Our happiness of finding swallows the heartbreak of losing. But there's more than that as well. Before the certainty of resurrection, we were all just dead men and women walking. We try not to think about our own mortality because we don't think there's any meaning beyond it. But you see, death has no sting if it kills no part of us except that which just drags us down. And death has no sting if through it darkness actually becomes light and weakness is transformed into strength and loss into love. Death has no sting at all if through it we become what God made us to be. And of course, death has no sting if in fact it is just the beginning. The great academic C.S. Lewis once said, "This life is just the title and cover page. When we get to heaven, we shall begin chapter 1 of that great story. A story that goes on forever. A story in which every chapter is better than the chapter before. And of death he wrote, the term is over. The holidays have begun." And Paul finishes his chapter, "Therefore, my brothers and sisters, stand firm. In the face of persecution, stand firm. In the face of loss, stand firm. Always give yourself to the work of God, because you know that your labour is not in vain. May God's credible truth lead you and me into life-transforming hope.